I had just sat down at the back booth of Marlene's diner, a quiet little spot I used to visit after my VA appointments. It wasn't fancy, checkered floors, chrome stools, and the same jukebox that hadn't worked since 2009, but it was peaceful. Familiar. I wore my olive drab jacket that still had the army patch stitched over the heart. Old habit. The waitress, a teenager who probably didn't even know what the VA was, slid a menu in front of me without a word. No smile. The air shifted the moment the door jingled again. 2 uniformed officers walked in. Big guys. One of them had that buzz cut and swagger you see in recruitment ads, the other one looked like he hadn't blinked in years. They didn't look around. They came straight for me. ID, the tall one said. No introduction. No explanation. Just that, like I was already guilty of something. I looked up, calm but firm. For what reason, officer? He didn't like that. Not even a little. Buzzcut leaned in close. We got a report of someone loitering and acting suspicious. You match the description. Loitering? I ordered a coffee 2 minutes ago. The second cop rested his hand on his belt, hovering near the taser. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Around us, Forks paused mid-air. Eyes diverted. Everyone pretended not to notice what was happening, but I saw the cook freeze behind the counter, the busboy glance at the exit. I reached into my pocket slowly and pulled out my wallet. Here. Army ID. Honorable discharge. Retired Staff Sergeant. They didn't even glance at it. Buzzcut gave a smug laugh. Doesn't mean you're not trespassing. That's when I knew, this wasn't about the law. This was about power. But they didn't know who I'd already texted. Or how one silent call, just a pressed button, was all it would take. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Instead, I tapped my phone twice under the table, a preset I'd configured months ago. It was a security protocol some of us veterans still used. Not many people knew it existed. It looked like nothing. Just a man fidgeting under the table. Buzzcut noticed. Hey, he barked. Hands where I can see them. I placed both hands flat on the table, phone still vibrating quietly in my lap. You making calls now? The second cop sneered, moving closer. You think that's smart? The waitress stood by the counter, frozen. One of the regulars, an old man with a cane, whispered something to his wife. No one moved to help. No one ever does. I told you, I'm just here for a coffee. Buzzcut reached over and snatched my wallet off the table. Let's see what we're dealing with here. He flipped it open, glancing at the ID again, then stopped. His eyes narrowed. Who's this contact? You got a DoD emergency line saved on your lock screen? That's when the phone rang. Not mine, his. He hesitated before answering. Yeah. There was silence. Then a sudden stiffening in his shoulders. The second cop's radio crackled too. He stepped back instinctively, glancing at his partner. Buzzcut's voice dropped. Yes, sir. No, sir, we weren't aware. Yes, I see it now. Yes, I understand. He hung up slowly. Then looked at me with something I hadn't seen since basic training, fear. I leaned back in the booth. Everything all right, officer? He swallowed hard. We'll be on our way. Sorry for the misunderstanding. He tossed the wallet back across the table and turned to leave. The diner was dead quiet. But I wasn't done. They were almost at the door when I said, calmly, officers. Both froze. Buzzcut turned first, jaw tight. His partner followed, more cautious now. You forgot something, I said, flicking my fingers toward the floor. His notepad had slipped out in the rush, it landed under the edge of my boot. Buzzcut walked back with forced composure. Appreciated, he muttered. I didn't move my foot. You didn't ask who called you. His partner shifted uneasily. We, got updated information. That's all. Updated by who? I asked, folding my arms. You were seconds from dragging me out of here in cuffs. So tell me, who gave the order to stand down? Buzzcut didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew I knew. I slowly lifted my foot and handed him the pad. Then added, let your department know something else. That number doesn't just go to Washington. It routes through people who remember what I've done, and what I've seen. People who don't take kindly to vets being humiliated in diners for doing nothing but existing. A pause. Then I leaned forward. Next time, come with respect. Not a badge and a threat. They left without another word. Heads down. The moment the door shut behind them, the diner exhaled. The waitress finally moved again. The old man nodded at me with quiet recognition. I took a sip of my coffee, now lukewarm. On the house, the cook called from behind the counter. And thank you for your service, Sergeant. I just gave a nod. I didn't come here to be thanked. I came here for peace. But in this country, sometimes peace has to be earned twice. Back in my truck, I finally checked the return call log. It confirmed what I already knew. The call hadn't just gone to a contact, it had triggered a chain up the old pipeline. Lieutenant Commander J. Ellis, retired Navy Intel, now embedded in a federal oversight group. He still owed me from an op overseas, one we both agreed never happened on paper. But loyalty runs deeper than paperwork. He hadn't said much on the line. He didn't have to. Just one sentence, you stay seated, I'll handle the rest. And he had. In under 60 seconds. I looked out the windshield. Across the lot, the two cops sat in their cruiser, motionless. They hadn't even turned the engine on. Probably waiting for instructions. Or clearance to breathe again. I could have left then. Driven off and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped out. Walked straight across the parking lot. Buzzcut saw me coming and rolled his window down halfway, warily. I'm not here to fight, I said. But I am here to teach. He didn't answer. You walk into a diner and zero in on the only black man with a military patch, that's not law enforcement. That's profiling. And it could have cost you more than your badge today. Still silent. But I saw it in his eyes, he was listening now. Maybe for the first time. His partner spoke up. We didn't know who you were. That's the problem, I said flatly. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. A pause. Then I turned and walked back to my truck, my boots echoing on the pavement like punctuation. Not vengeance. Not anger. Just truth, spoken in the only language some people still understand. The drive home was quiet, just the hum of tires on old asphalt and the soft rasp of talk radio I barely listened to anymore. But my mind wasn't quiet. I kept thinking about how quickly it had all escalated. How thin the line still was between respect and suspicion, even for someone like me. Medals didn't matter. Service didn't matter. Not when skin color enters the equation first. But what did matter, was the call. The network. The silent power that still lingered among those who served, not in politics, not in headlines, but in shadows, in loyalty, in codes that didn't need to be spoken. Back at home, I opened the old wooden box I kept under my desk. Inside were the things I never displayed, the commendations, the medals, the folded flag from my father's casket. I hadn't touched them in years. But tonight, I placed the Army ID on top. Not as a badge. Not as a shield. As a reminder. Because today proved something, sometimes silence speaks louder than rage. Sometimes calm leaves a deeper scar than shouting. And sometimes, the quietest call makes the loudest statement. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Official looking. No return address. Inside was a brief note typed in all caps, incident number 9047 reviewed. Officers in question reassigned pending training. Due to your discretion, no public release initiated. Your actions are noted and appreciated. At the bottom was a familiar signature. J. Ellis. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. No need to frame it. I wasn't after glory. That same day, the waitress from Marlene's messaged me on Facebook. I didn't know how she got my name, probably the receipt. Hey. I saw everything that day. I didn't know what to do. I froze. I'm sorry. But I've been thinking about it ever since. I signed up for a community justice training today. Because of you. That hit harder than I expected. I sat on the porch that evening with my coffee, watching the sun dip behind the trees. I didn't need parades. I didn't need medals. I needed moments like this, when silence turned to reflection, when fear turned to growth. The diner incident wouldn't go viral. No trending hashtags. No news vans. But somewhere, a rookie cop might think twice next time. Somewhere, a girl in a diner might stand up when others won't. And somewhere, an old veteran might sit a little taller, knowing he's not invisible. Because sometimes, one silent call leaves echoes loud enough to shake the system. 2 months passed. I hadn't been back to Marlene's. Not because I was afraid, I just needed distance. Space to let things settle. But one crisp morning, I pulled into that same parking lot, stepped inside, and slid into my old booth by the window like nothing had changed. The place was quieter than usual. Same checkered floors. Same broken jukebox. But there was a different energy now. The waitress, the same young girl from before, walked over with a small, proud smile. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. "Black." As she poured, she added, "We added a sign last week, by the register. It says, 'Veterans Welcome. Harassment Not.'" I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. "Marlene said it was your seat that started it." I glanced toward the door. A couple of local officers had just walked in. Different faces this time. They looked around, saw me, and nodded respectfully before taking seats near the front. No tension. No fear. Just awareness. And that, in this world, was rare. I sipped the coffee slowly. The waitress lingered. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure." That day, what would have happened if they didn't back off? I looked her in the eyes, calm and steady. Then the call would have gone higher. And they'd have learned, too late, that some people don't yell to be heard. They just know exactly who to call. She nodded slowly, understanding more than her age should have allowed. And with that, she walked away. I sat back, coffee in hand, and watched sunlight hit the window. Maybe I hadn't changed the world. But I'd changed this room. And sometimes, that's where revolutions begin. A few weeks later, I got another message, this time from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture was of a young man in uniform. "Sir, you don't know me, but my father served with you in Kandahar. He always told me about the quiet fire you carried. Said if I ever saw your name, I should listen. I just got stationed stateside, and I read what happened at the diner. I want you to know, I showed it to my whole precinct. We watched the security footage they pulled during training. The new chief made it mandatory. You didn't just press a button. You started a ripple. Thank you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying with just 2 words, "Stay steady." That weekend, I returned to Marlene's again. The place was different now. Not just in policy, but in spirit. There was a small brass plaque fixed into the side of the booth where I always sat. I hadn't noticed it before. It read, "Reserved for veterans, and those who stand their ground with grace." I ran my fingers across the words. The cook caught my eye from behind the counter. "We figured you wouldn't want anything flashy," he said. "But people need to remember." I nodded once. Quiet. Grateful. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers through a legacy. And sits patiently in a booth by the window. I didn't expect to see him again. But one rainy afternoon, as I nursed a hot coffee and watched the diner windows blur with drizzle, the door opened, and there he was. Buzz cut. No uniform this time. Just jeans, a windbreaker, and a face that carried more weight than before. He stood just inside the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. He approached slowly. Cautiously. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the other side of the booth. "Up to you." He slid in. No badge to flash this time. No bravado. Just a man trying to find the right words. "I was wrong that day," he said, hands folded on the table. "About how I handled it. About what I assumed. I've been learning since then." I didn't say anything. Let him sit in the weight of that silence. "I got reassigned," he continued. "They made me go through a new program. Part of the accountability unit. I've been listening more. Watching myself. And others." I nodded once. "Good. I just needed you to know," he added, voice lower, "that it made a difference. You didn't fight me. You didn't yell. But you still won." I leaned forward. It wasn't about winning. It was about stopping the next time. Maybe the next you. He blinked, absorbing that. Then he reached into his jacket and placed something on the table, a small, folded card. "New badge number," he said. "Different department. But this time, I'm doing it right." He stood up. Paused. Then added, "And thank you, for showing me what strength really looks like." I watched him leave, the door shutting behind him with a soft clang. I picked up the card. Not because I needed it. But because it reminded me, sometimes, the deepest change doesn't come from force. It comes from example. And sometimes, even the ones who got it wrong, come back to learn. Weeks passed again. Life moved on. No headlines. No viral clips. Just the slow grind of real change, the kind you don't see, but feel. Then one afternoon, as I stepped out of the VA clinic, I noticed a woman in a crisp suit waiting by a black government SUV. She looked federal, and not the kind you ignore. "Staff Sergeant Walker?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. "Who's asking?" She extended a hand. "Director Fields. Internal Oversight and Civil Response Division. We've reviewed what happened at the diner. And what you didn't do." I raised an eyebrow. "We've created a pilot program," she continued. "Veterans who understand restraint, calm under pressure, chain of command, but also what justice looks like at ground level. We want people like you, helping train law enforcement." I chuckled dryly. "So now I'm supposed to teach them how not to harass folks like me?" She didn't flinch. "No. You'd be teaching them how to lead before they react. How to read before they assume. And how silence, when used right, can de-escalate faster than a taser ever will." I looked past her at the busy sidewalk. People rushing. Talking. Living. I thought of the booth. The plaque. The ripple. Then I looked her in the eye. "I'll think about it." She smiled. "That's all I ask." As she turned to leave, she paused. "You ever wonder what one moment can do?" I replied quietly, "Only every day." Because a moment in a diner didn't just expose a system, it started to change one. And this time, the table didn't just turn. It was rebuilt. Months later, I returned to Marlene's once more, not as a customer, but as a guest of honor. They were holding a quiet community event. No cameras. No speeches. Just veterans, officers, locals, all sitting together at booths that once divided. Marlene herself waved me over. "We've got something for you." She guided me to the window booth, my booth, but it wasn't mine anymore. Not really. A new plaque had been installed, larger than the last. It read, "This table is a reminder that silence can command more than shouting," and one veteran's calm changed an entire town. I stood there, hands behind my back, taking it in. Not for ego. Not for credit. But for proof. That the right action, even quiet, measured, could echo into something permanent. A young officer walked up beside me. Couldn't have been older than 24. Nervous. Respectful. He extended a hand. "I transferred here because of what I read about you, sir." I shook it. Firm. Direct. Then make it count. He nodded hard, like he'd been waiting for those exact words. And as people filtered in, I didn't sit at the booth. I left it open. For whoever needed it next. Because symbols only matter when they're shared. And that seat wasn't just for me anymore. It was for anyone who knew that true power doesn't come from the badge, or the uniform, it comes from the restraint not to use it, and the wisdom to know when to stand up without raising a voice. Years later, long after the headlines faded and the officers had moved on to new precincts, Marlene's diner remained. Same floors. Same booths. But that back table by the window had become something else. People came from out of town just to sit there. Veterans. Cadets. Teachers. Judges. Even a few quiet politicians who didn't announce themselves. They didn't take selfies. They didn't post stories. They just sat. Read the plaque. And remembered. On the anniversary of the incident, they held a small ceremony. No fanfare, just chairs in a circle and coffee in real mugs. I was older now. Slower. But I showed up. Sat near the back. Watched. A young black cadet stood up. Barely 20. Uniform stiff and new. She pointed to the plaque and said, "They taught us about this table in training." Not because it was loud. But because it wasn't. There was silence afterward. The good kind. The kind that says something's been understood. Afterward, she came over, nervous. "You're him, aren't you?" I smiled. I was just a man who wanted peace with his coffee. She laughed gently. "Well, you gave us more than that." And with that, she sat in the booth, alone for a moment, her hand resting on the brass. In that moment, I knew. This wasn't about me anymore. It never really was. It was about what comes after. What grows from the quiet. What justice looks like, when no one's filming. And how one table, in a forgotten diner, became a classroom for courage, restraint, and change.